GM servers. Welcome back to another tutorial, and in this tutorial we're going to focus on the concepts associated with the REST API agent and the webhook trigger. And using these concepts, we're also going to look at an example of how we can leverage these agents and the trigger for being able to build a full stack application with OpenServ powering the agentic backend. Hence, using this basic example of a chat app, you can extend it to building all kinds of agentic applications. All right. First, let's get started with understanding what is the REST API agent. The REST API agent is a specialized agent that has the capability to call all kinds of APIs, even if they need APIs keys or any other specific special parameters associated with, let's say, GET request or POST request, etc. Let's look at some examples. So here's an example where an API key is not needed. It's an open API by the Polymarket folks. So I'm just going to paste it onto the input. But before that, let's just look at how the request looks. It's simply us mentioning that it's a GET request, and this is the URL that you have to hit. And once we drop that into the output here, move to run mode and click on start, the REST API agent is automatically going to figure out that this is the REST API call to be made and to this endpoint, and there you go. We have the response from the API endpoint. Now, the way this can be leveraged is that you can use this REST API agent as part of any of your complex workflows which needs all kinds of external data. You can drop in your API key and make it interact with certain API endpoints, get the data, and then use that data as the output. And then if you want, you can also format the data by extracting specific fields, by instructing it specifically and defining the schema of the output. You can just probably pick up the outcome prices or, specific fields that you just want out of this huge response and feed it onto the next agent that does another specialized task using the data that was just fetched using the REST API agent. So this opens a plethora of possibilities for being able to fetch all kinds of external data from different endpoints and feeding it and giving more context to your agents. Further, let's look at an example where an API key is needed. As we had already gone through the concept of secrets and the secret management section, for being able to assign a secret to an agent, you have to make sure that it's first added within the secret manager. So in my case, for this example, we'll be looking at the massive API, which basically fetches data associated with the US stock data. Let's say you have an autonomous trader for US stocks. You can just use this endpoint and mention that the name of the secret that has the API key, in my case, it's the massive_key, and then that API key is in the query. This is very specific to the kind of API you're talking to. So in this case, this API expects the API key in the query. And you're going to have to mention the name of the query parameter where the API key is passed. In this case, it's API, bold K, and key. And then we're going to just copy this and drop it in here. And another important thing is once you have saved, in this case, I've already added a secret with the name massive key. You'll have to click on add new secret and add it. Once you've done that, we'll have to make sure that the REST API agent is assigned that specific secret. Only if it's assigned that specific secret, it's going to have access to it. Now we're going to switch to run mode, click on start, and ideally it's going to use the API key and call the API endpoint. All right, there we go. Here we have the response for this specific API call. Perfect. So this was an example of how the API key can be used for sending special REST API requests which need authentication headers. It can also be done in few other ways. All the standard ways are covered. We'll be dropping in all the different examples in the documentation. Have a look at them and leverage whichever example or whichever paradigm of REST API calling you want to leverage. Moving forward, now that we understand how REST API agent works, using this concept, let's look at an example of how you can build a full stack application, send a request from the full stack application onto the agentic app backend, which is the platform here, and further carry out all the different workflows or processes or executions that you want to carry out and send back the output or the response of those tasks back to the full stack application from where you just sent the request. Let's understand how a webhook trigger works. Let's go back to the design mode. A webhook trigger is, as the name suggests, it's simply a trigger that's triggered by a webhook URL. For being able to trigger a webhook trigger, you just have to copy the webhook URL and send a post request, which can also have a body with specific details. If you have specific requests, in this case, maybe a message or a chat request, you can just send it all through the body of the post request, and it gets automatically, and then it gets triggered over here remotely once you send a post request, and then it's going to trigger all the workflow that is linked to it. So this is a really useful way for being able to remotely execute tasks by sending a webhook post request and carrying out all the tasks, and then finally, once all the tasks are done, the REST API agent is going to send back to the callback URL where the front end is expecting for a response, and it's going to have the response of all the process or all the tasks that were just executed on the platform. So to understand this in a visual manner, let's look at this diagram. Before that, let's also understand that what are the configurations for being able to make this work. So this repo with the Next.js example, if we look at the env, we'll have to assign the key environment variable here is the OpenServ webhook URL, which is essentially just this webhook URL. Copy it and just paste it here. It's going to look like this. This is the same in this case, and drop it here. And once that's done, the front end is aware that this is the URL where the front end will have to hit to be able to trigger the workflow. And then we've got few other parameters which can be customized based on use cases. If your task takes a lot of time, you can increase the timeout period and also the polling interval, etc. You'll have to optimize it based on the kind of task you're triggering. And once that is set up on the front end, make sure that you're running it. If you're testing it locally, you'll have to, of course, run it on the local host, and then you'll have to use ngrok and expose that specific port. In my case, it's a 3001 port. I'm going to expose it using ngrok http and 3001. That's the command. And then I'm going to copy this, and let me just show you how I'm going to share the callback URL. Let me just delete it, add a new secret, call it ngrok front end, and drop in. And here, the crucial part to keep in mind is, let's say you've moved to prod, you have a domain, and the API callback route, in my case, you can always change it, is at API and callback. Make sure that you have set this properly and click on OK. Now this secret has been saved. Now the key thing to remember here is refresh so that the new secret is fetched, and make sure you assign the new secret that we just made with the callback URL to the REST API agent so that it has access to the URL where it has to send back the output. All right, now that that's done, let's just look at the description. All right, let's look at the schema. The way it's defined, we're going to give the ID, front-end URL name, and then there's a specific default name, which is the ngrok front-end, which is the name of the secret that we just assigned, and then the capability, in this case, is the callback capability, and then the output and the ID. So it's very simple in terms of the schema. Further, let's move to run mode. Once we're in run mode, we can just test it out. Now that the secret has been set, the REST API agent is aware of the callback URL where it has to send back the data. Let's just go to the example and ask something like, what is Web3? And the way this works is pretty simple. Here you can see it got triggered and then it's carrying out the task. The way it works is that the browser from the front end is going to send a request to the platform, which is the agentic app backend, with a bunch of different tasks which you have defined, and it's going to carry out all those tasks. And finally, you're going to connect the final node to the REST API agent. In this case, the agent here is the REST API agent, and the REST API agent is going to take all that and use the callback URL that you have defined in the secret, and it's going to send back all that data back to the front end, and we're going to be able to see it over here in a moment. There you go. Here we have the response generated by the workflow, and this is a very basic example. Practically, you would be having a lot of nodes in between and carry out all kinds of complex tasks, like maybe research tasks or video generation or image generation, or let's say trading tasks, and then finally send back the status of the execution or the report or the output, maybe files, etc., back using the REST API agent. And this here was a quick walkthrough of how the REST API agent works, how you can leverage it to call external APIs and use the data for all kinds of tasks within your workflow, and further how the webhook trigger works, and how all these concepts can be put together to build any kind of full stack app. In this example, we used a chat app example with Next.js, and I'll also be sharing the template, but you can extend the same Next.js template to build all kinds of full stack applications and carry out all kinds of, power the backend, the agentic app backend with OpenServ, carry out all kinds of complex tasks, and then send back the response using this specific pathway of REST API agent. All right, we're going to soon drop more complex use cases and examples and templates. Stay tuned. Thank you very much.